Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be discussing the ROI, or return on investment, after the halving. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So we had the halving a few weeks ago, and I know a lot of people were optimistic about it going up only after that, but we have had a bit of a pullback here. And so what I wanted to do is look back in history and see if what is going on right now is normal or not. We've had 4 halvings, so we can look at 3 prior occasions and compare those return on investment ROI from the halving to the current cycle. And what I find interesting is, in the same way that Bitcoin is somewhat cyclical, right? We had our bear market years, 2014, 2018, and 2022. But even this tends to change every other cycle on what Bitcoin actually does just after the halving. For instance, after the first halving, Bitcoin did not go below the price it was at the halving. In fact, you can see that it was essentially up only after that, and we never took out that price. In the second halving, people thought it was going to do the exact same thing, basically up only after the halving. And what happened? We actually had we went up a little bit, about 5%, and then Bitcoin sold off by about 20%. So actually about 25% if you take it from where it had rallied to. But as measured from the halving, it had gone down about 20% or so. So going into the 2016 halving, everyone thought it was going to just be up only. And instead, we had a 20% drop. It scared everyone off, and then it went up. So then after the third halving, everyone was looking at what had happened in 2016. And they're like, all right, there's going to be a post-halving dip. And so we had the third halving cycle, and we never went below that price after the halving, right? And I actually did a video on this. I was not convinced we were going to have a post-halving dip back then, because we had looked at halving cycle 1 and 2, and it said, look, I mean, yeah, we had a dip after the last cycle, after the last halving, but after the first halving, we did not have a dip. So you might not actually get that dip that a lot of people are wanting. And that is why I even made a video back then. This was back when Bitcoin was $9,000. And I said, what Bitcoin halving crashed, right? Because back then, everyone was talking about, all right, it's going to play out the exact same way as 2016. You're going to go up and you're going to get a crash just after the halving. And then we're going to go up. But instead, Bitcoin just went up. So now this halving, I think everyone forgot about what 2016 was like. And they've only looked at it compared to last halving and also the first halving, where it only went up. And so now a lot of people are surprised that it's gone down. But in reality, it also went down in 2016 as well. In fact, this is the worst performance of Bitcoin following the halving that we've seen, as measured by this many days after the halving, right? So 18 days after the halving, the ROI, as measured from the price at the halving, is 0.96. So it's down about 4%, whereas every other cycle at this point was up as measured from the halving. In 2012, we were about 8% up. In 2016, we're about 1% up. And in 2020, we were about 10% up. So this cycle is the only cycle where by day 18, we're actually still down. But you can see that in 2016, we actually had a larger drop come, and that finalized on day 24. Which, again, we're currently on day 18 right now. Again, I don't know if it's going to play out like that or not, but it is something to be aware of, right? It is something to be aware of. And I think a lot of people just want to know, like, is it going to go up or down? Guys, I throw a lot of models your way, but at the end of the day, no one knows. All models are wrong. Some are useful. It looks to me like it's mimicking 2016 a lot more than the other 2 cycles, which kind of makes sense. I mean, a lot of people who've been following Bitcoin for a while have been comparing this cycle more so to the 2016 cycle than the one in 2020. So it shouldn't really be that big of a surprise that Bitcoin is showing a little bit of weakness after the halving. Furthermore, this is the first cycle where Bitcoin had taken out the prior all-time high before the halving. So that might be another decent reason why Bitcoin is showing a little bit more weakness after the halving, because it already went to new all-time highs. Normally, all-time highs are reserved for after the halving. This is the first halving cycle where we had taken out the prior cycle's all-time high before the halving even occurred. So you think about it like that. I mean, it certainly makes sense that Bitcoin is showing a little bit more weakness right now than it has been before. But I just wanted to show this. I mean, and if you look at 2016, which is, which might be relevant to compare to, you can see that it didn't durably get back above an ROI of 1 until about 3 to 3.5 months after the halving. And I don't know if it's going to play out like that or not, but you can see that that would be more evidence of a summer lull, right? We talked a little bit about a summer lull, and that could potentially be more evidence for a summer lull if you look at Bitcoin's ROI as measured from the halving and compare it to the 2016 cycle. So I would continue to sort of look at that and be aware that it could play out like this, even though I think a lot of people were mostly just looking at what happened after the last halving cycle. This is another way to look at it and say, you know what, this is actually pretty ordinary for Bitcoin to do something like this, and it shouldn't really be that surprising. And if you go look at Bitcoin USD, we talked about, the current move. We basically talked a lot about this move. Basically, the idea is that no matter what, you're going to get a bounce off of this low, right? You take out the prior low, and then you bounce, and then you go sideways for a little bit, right? And that arguably is where we are right now. So at this point, while I think there's a good chance there's a summer lull, there is no guarantee that there's going to be one. In fact, maybe it'll just play out like this one over here and completely put the whole summer lull theory to rest if it just plays out like it did after the spot ETF. Again, there are some differences between this move over here and this one. For instance, going into the spot ETF, we were putting in new cycle highs, whereas in going into the halving, we were not. So there's a little bit more weakness in the trend here than there was back over here. But regardless, if you go back to some of the videos from about a month ago, we suggested that we would likely bleed down, take out this low right here, late April, early May, bounce back up, consolidate, where everyone argues again about what's going to happen, and then we'll figure out, is it another move up, or are we going to accept below 60K going into the summer months? So I would follow this still, and it's just one of those things where I can't possibly know if it's going to be a summer lull or not. Every single year I say there's a good chance we're going to get one, and so far we have. I mean, we had one in 2021, we had one in 2022, right? I mean, I think back then people didn't feel like it was a summer lull, but I don't know what you call this. Even in 2023, we mostly had one where the market got relatively boring. But even if it is a summer lull, it doesn't mean that the market's not going to keep you second guessing the entire way, right? So I do think, there is some reason to believe it could be a summer lull, but I also don't want to give you the impression that it has to be, right? There is, of course, evidence to suggest that it might not be, and I just want to remind people that, I've said for 2.5 years, I don't trade my short-term views, right? I just buy when Bitcoin's at low risk levels and I sell when it's at high risk levels. I don't try to flip-flop based on what I think it's going to do next week. So please keep that in mind. I still do think it's worthwhile to follow Bitcoin here in the short term, because so far it's kind of doing, sort of the things that we suggested, basically just bouncing around between the 8-week SMA and the bull market support band, which is actually what it did basically at around the same time last year, right? You can see we just kind of bounced around between the bull market support band and the 8-week moving average, which is precisely what it is doing again. So I do think that is something worthwhile to watch if we are to sort of follow the 2016 pattern. I mean, you can see over here, we came up to the 8-week SMA and then we just got rejected, right? And then we came back down, and you can see that so far, all the attempts at the 8-week SMA have in fact been rejected. And we didn't actually get back above the 8-week SMA last year until June, right? It actually took until June to get back above it. So I would certainly keep this stuff in mind, because I mean, the stuff doesn't always have to play out exactly, but it can often rhyme, you know, where your sort of your first pullback is just a wick, and then your second pullback is a longer consolidation. So I would keep this in mind, and if this continues to play out, then it very well might just simply be very similar to what we saw in 2016. Basically a slow bleed back to the bull market support band, and also what we saw back in 2023. So again, looking at the ROI after the halving, to me, this still looks really similar to 2016. And I think a lot of people have kind of gotten ahead of themselves just simply because of what happened last cycle. But remember, the market is always going to throw its curveballs, and it's important to remember that. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.